The Exitherians had never imagined this moment would come. They, once the dominant force in the galaxy, had prided themselves on their strength, their unmatched technology, their towering fleets that patrolled the reaches of space. But now, their empire was unraveling. The Ravagers, a cruel and relentless species from beyond the galactic rim, had struck without warning. Their ships, alien and horrifying, descended like a plague, tearing apart Cytherian defenses with ease. In just weeks, entire colonies fell. World after world was consumed in fire and ruin. The Exitherian military, once the most formidable, was stretched thin, unable to protect its people. And the worst part, the Ravagers didn't care. They sought nothing but destruction, an endless thirst for chaos that couldn't be reasoned with. Every attempt at negotiation or surrender had been met with cruel rejection. Now, the last remaining Cytherian counselors gathered in a dimly lit chamber beneath the capital city. The air was thick with tension, the weight of failure pressing down on their shoulders. Their once pristine planet, its surfaces now scared by the wreckage of battle, lay at the mercy of the invaders. Counselor Zrath, an elder and veteran of countless diplomatic efforts, stood at the center of the room. His usual calm demeanor was shattered, replaced by the frustration of knowing that they had no options left. Desperation had driven him to a decision that, just days ago, would have been unthinkable. The Exitherian Empire had never relied on the help of others. But now, as the enemy approached their final stronghold, Zrath had no choice. He turned to the communications officer. "Send it," he ordered, his voice low but firm. "We have no other choice." The officer hesitated for only a moment before transmitting the emergency distress signal across every known frequency. The words would travel across the stars, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear it. "To all who hear this, we, the Exitherians, request assistance. Our people are being annihilated. The Ravagers, a force beyond our strength, have come to destroy us. We implore any who can to aid us in our hour of need. Help is required immediately. We cannot withstand much longer. Please, we beg you, come quickly." As the transmission reached its end, the council chamber fell into silence. Zrath's hands trembled as he turned away from the communications console. The hope that once flickered now felt fragile. Who would answer? The Galactic Council, the mighty Vroxy Empire, maybe the peaceful Arathians, or would they be ignored, left to die alone in the vastness of space? The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Minutes felt like hours. The Exitherians waited, not knowing that the answer was already coming. But it would not come from the places they expected. It would come from Earth, a world they had long overlooked. And in less than an hour, the first response arrived, cutting through the static of space. It was simple, direct. "Help is on the way. You have 5 hours to surrender or face the consequences." The response came faster than anyone had expected. Humanity's message arrived barely an hour after the Cytherian distress call. At first, the counselors thought they had misunderstood. The translation was clear, but the words, they didn't make sense. "Help is on the way. You have 5 hours to surrender or face the consequences." Surrender. What did that mean? Did the humans intend to negotiate with the Ravagers? No, this was something different. The tone of the message was devoid of diplomacy, no offers of mediation or peace. There was only the stark ultimatum: surrender or face the consequences. For the Cytherians, this was a puzzling development. They had hoped for help, but not this kind of help. After all, humanity was still considered a relatively new force in the galaxy, still viewed by many as primitive compared to the ancient, powerful empires that controlled much of the universe. The Exitherians had once dismissed humanity as a species with potential, but no real power. They never expected the humans would respond in such a direct and forceful manner. Counselor Zrath paced nervously. He had sent out the message in desperation, but he hadn't anticipated this kind of reply. It was one thing to ask for help, but another to be faced with an aggressive demand. Do they even know what they're up against? He muttered under his breath, pacing the length of the room. The Ravagers were a race of brutal conquerors, well-armed and merciless. The Exetherians had struggled to hold their ground for weeks, using every last bit of military power they could muster. What could the humans possibly offer that would make a difference in such a short amount of time? Zrath wasn't alone in his concern. His fellow counselors exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain of what to make of humanity's approach. Some thought it was a bluff, after all. No species would dare attack the Ravagers head-on without a carefully calculated strategy. But even the most skeptical among them had to admit that there was something different in the human message. The confidence in their response was palpable, something that Exetherians didn't understand. The next few hours were filled with tension, as the Exetherian Council prepared for a worst-case scenario. The Ravagers were still advancing, their ships closing in on the last remaining stronghold. There was no time for second-guessing. Zrath ordered his fleet to form defensive positions around the capital, bracing for a final stand. Yet, despite their preparations, Zrath could not shake the growing unease in his chest. He had no doubt that the Ravagers would soon strike with everything they had. But what troubled him most was the fact that humanity had promised to act, and there was no turning back now. Just as he turned to leave the room to address his commanders, an alert flashed on the screen. Human ships had been detected. They had arrived, but what would they bring? Seconds later, a communication line opened. "Human ships are entering the system now," the officer said, his voice shaking. Zrath turned to look at the display. The Exetherian capital was quiet, but the stars above were about to change forever. The moment that Exetherians detected the human fleet, panic swept through the command center. The ships were unlike anything they had seen before. Sleek, dark, and terrifyingly silent, they appeared in the system with alarming speed, far faster than any Exetherian or Ravager ship could achieve. There was no fanfare, no sudden broadcast of human demands, just a cold and precise appearance in their space. "How many?" Counselor Zrath's voice broke the tense silence. "At least 50 capital ships, far larger than our own," one of the officers replied. "And dozens of smaller vessels. They're positioning themselves around the Ravager forces." Zrath's heart skipped a beat. 50 capital ships. The Ravagers, who had overwhelmed the Exetherians with far fewer numbers, were now facing a fleet that seemed almost impossibly vast. And yet there was no sign of aggression, no immediate attack. The human fleet simply positioned itself, surrounding the Ravager armada with a cold, mechanical precision. It was a terrifying sight. The Exetherian fleet, scattered and disorganized, seemed pitiful in comparison. Their best ships were already battered and on the verge of collapse from previous Ravager attacks. Their last hope rested on the faint hope that these humans would offer some kind of negotiation, not realizing the raw, unrelenting force humanity was about to unleash. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Without warning, the humans opened fire. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the closest human warship. The first Ravager ship to be targeted disintegrated in a flash of light, its hull shattered by an explosion so violent that it sent shockwaves through the entire fleet. The blast ripped apart the surrounding ships, sending fragments of alien steel scattering into the void. The Ravagers, stunned by the sudden onslaught, didn't even have time to retaliate before the humans launched their next volley. Laser beams, plasma cannons, and kinetic projectiles rained down from the human fleet, each one hitting its target with surgical precision. The Ravagers had always relied on brute strength, a relentless assault of numbers and firepower, but humanity's strategy was different. It was clean, efficient, and ruthless. The Ravagers attempted to retaliate. A squadron of ships attempted to break through the human formation, but the humans responded with calculated aggression. Fighters swarmed, cutting through the Ravager defenses like a hot knife through butter. Any Ravager that dared to approach a human ship was swiftly destroyed, their vessels disintegrating before they could fire a single shot. On the surface of the Exetherian capital, soldiers and civilians alike watched in shock and awe as the battle unfolded in space. Some Cytherians, especially the older counselors, had never seen anything like this in their lives. The Ravagers, the supposedly invincible force that had brought the Cytherians to the edge of extinction, were being wiped out with terrifying efficiency. From the bridge of the flagship, Zrath watched in stunned silence as humanity's fury unfolded. There was no warning, no grand speeches or demands for surrender. Humanity's answer to the Ravagers had been one of pure, unrelenting destruction. The Cytherians had never believed that any force could rival their own, but humanity had proven them wrong. Zrath turned to his officers, his mind racing. "Are they even trying to negotiate?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, Counselor," an officer replied. "They're just destroying them." Humanity wasn't interested in talks. They were there for one reason only: to end the threat. The Ravagers, who had struck fear into the hearts of the galaxy for centuries, were now being eradicated before the very eyes of the Cytherians. And it was only the beginning. The Ravagers, though stunned and reeling from the brutal onslaught, were not finished. They had survived countless wars, enduring endless brutality in their conquest of the galaxy, and they would not go quietly into defeat. As humanity's devastating firepower continued to rip apart their fleet, the remaining Ravager leaders gathered for one final council. The Ravager warlord, Vrax, stood at the helm of his ship, his dark eyes burning with fury. His people had fought to dominate, not to be exterminated. He wasn't about to let some upstart humans erase everything they had worked for. In the dark depths of space, far from the prying eyes of the galaxy, Vrax sparked out orders to his remaining forces. "We are the Ravagers. We do not surrender," he roared, rallying his commanders. "We will make them pay for this insult. Launch everything we have left." Vrax's command was swift and ruthless. The Ravagers scrambled to their remaining warships, organizing a desperate counterattack. The human fleet was powerful, but the Ravagers had one advantage: sheer unpredictability. They weren't known for precise tactics. They fought like a swarm of locusts, unpredictable and vicious. Their ships were now more focused on creating chaos than executing coordinated strategies. The Cytherians, still in shock from humanity's swift intervention, watched from the sidelines. They had never seen a force capable of such precision and overwhelming firepower, and now, watching the Ravagers regroup, they feared for their own future. The humans were powerful, but the Ravagers were desperate, and desperate creatures fought with a fury unlike any other. The battle intensified. The Ravagers unleashed every last weapon in their arsenal: massive energy cannons, bioweapon missiles, and cloaking devices, all fired at the human fleet in a frenzied barrage. Human ships were damaged, but they showed no signs of faltering. They retaliated with even more ferocity. Missile volleys shattered the Ravager formations, sending ships spiraling into oblivion. Smaller ships, those that managed to slip past the human defenses, found themselves swarmed by human fighter craft, each maneuver executed with deadly precision. Every Ravager ship was systematically hunted down, its crew decimated before they could mount any significant resistance. On the capital planet, the Cytherians watched helplessly. The battle had now moved closer to their planet, with wreckage from destroyed ships scattering in all directions. The Ravagers, in their madness, had begun to target anything in their way, including Cytherian infrastructure. There was a growing sense of panic among the civilians below. The Ravagers, in their final rage, would not leave without exacting a toll on the homeworld. But humanity wasn't finished yet. As the Ravager counterattack continued, a new human tactic was deployed: pinpoint orbital bombardments that disrupted the Ravager command structure. Each barrage was perfectly timed to strike Ravager communication relays, leaving the remaining warlords isolated and disorganized. The Ravagers could no longer coordinate their forces. Their communications were shattered, their ships flying blind in the chaos. Counselor Zrath, unable to turn away from the live feed on his screen, watched in awe as humanity executed one flawless maneuver after another. The Ravagers were no longer a unified force. They were a rabble of desperate survivors, scattered and leaderless. It was only a matter of time before their entire fleet was wiped out. Zrath's hand clenched into a fist as he realized the truth. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a total annihilation. The Ravagers were being erased, their existence rendered meaningless by the overwhelming fury of humanity. The battle had begun hours ago, and in those brief hours, humanity had proven that it was not just a species capable of surviving. It was one that could destroy its enemies in the blink of an eye. And now, humanity's warships began their final approach toward the Ravager flagship. As the Ravager flagship loomed in the distance, humanity's forces began to tighten their grip on the battlefield. The once terrifying Ravagers, who had torn through civilizations with terrifying ease, were now cornered and confused. The remnants of their fleet, scattered and broken, had no hope of mounting a coordinated defense. The Ravager warlord, Vrax, stood on the bridge of the flagship, his rage palpable. He slammed his fist against the command console. "This is not over," Vrax bellowed, his voice shaking with fury. "We will fight until the last ship falls. We do not surrender." But his defiance rang hollow. Every Ravager ship that attempted to break through the human blockade was destroyed within minutes. Humanity's tactics were ruthless, their responses quick and precise, exploiting every weakness in the Ravager fleet's disarray. The humans were systematically dismantling the Ravager forces. Their fighters were like swarms of angry hornets, tearing through the already damaged ships with ease. In a single hour, the Ravager fleet had gone from a formidable military presence to a scattering of broken vessels. The Ravagers had underestimated the sheer lethality of humanity's approach, assuming they could overpower this young species through numbers alone. They had no idea how wrong they were. But the Ravager flagship, still intact, had a trump card left. Hidden deep within its belly, a weapon was primed, an ancient, catastrophic device capable of turning the tide of battle. It was an alien artifact, salvaged from the ruins of an old war, and it could obliterate entire continents with the push of a button. It was their last-ditch effort to turn the situation in their favor. With the Ravager fleet crumbling around them, the remaining warlords on board the flagship made a decision. They would destroy the Scytherian capital and any hope of a peaceful resolution. The Ravagers were ready to sacrifice everything to claim a final victory, even if it meant annihilating an entire planet in the process. On the Scytherian capital, Counselor Zrath's pulse quickened as he watched the Ravager flagship power up its weapon. "They're going to destroy us all," he whispered, his voice filled with despair. But just as quickly, humanity responded. A deep rumble echoed through space as the human fleet launched its final assault. A wave of energy pulses streamed from the human ships, and in an instant, they overwhelmed the Ravager flagship's defenses. The humans had known the Ravagers might try this, and their response was swift. The device, which had been designed to end worlds, was disabled in a fraction of a second by an electromagnetic pulse sent directly from humanity's flagship. The Ravager flagship trembled as its weapon systems shut down, the glowing energy core sputtering out of existence. Before the Ravagers could even attempt to regain control, a volley of precise fire from human capital ships tore through the flagship's shields. In moments, the great warship was reduced to a drifting hulk, its hull perforated by laser fire and its command center silent. On the ground, Scytherian soldiers stared up at the sky in disbelief. Humanity had done the impossible. Not only had they destroyed the Ravager fleet, but they had also prevented the total annihilation of their homeworld in a heartbeat. Counselor Zrath stood frozen, his mouth agape as he realized the truth. "It's over," he murmured. "We've won." The Ravagers, scattered and defeated, no longer posed a threat. In just over 5 hours, humanity had reversed the tide of war, saving the Scytherians from certain extinction. The incredible speed, the cold precision with which humanity had wiped out their enemies, left Zrath and the others in awe. The galaxy was no longer the same. Humanity had not come to simply save them. They had come to redefine what was possible in war. The silence that followed the destruction of the Ravager flagship was deafening. Across the battlefield, remnants of the Ravager fleet drifted, lifeless, through the void. What had once been a terrifying, nearly unstoppable force was now little more than debris. Humanity's ships hung in the distance, their hulls scarred from the battle, but still intact, ready for whatever came next. On the surface of the Scytherian capital, the shock was palpable. The citizens, who had spent the past few weeks watching their world burn, now stood in stunned disbelief. Their enemies, the invincible Ravagers, were gone, and it was humanity that had delivered the fatal blow. Counselor Zrath, who had witnessed the entire battle unfold, found himself unable to speak. The reality of the situation was too surreal. For centuries, the Exitherians had been one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, but now they owed their survival to a species they had barely considered a threat. The sheer speed and ruthlessness of humanity's response had shattered everything that Exitherians had once believed about galactic warfare. Counselor, a voice cut through his thoughts. Zrath turned to see one of his aides, a young officer, standing by his side. What do we do now? The Ravagers are gone, but what about the humans? What are they going to want from us? Zrath took a slow breath, his mind still processing everything that had happened. He had expected a prolonged war, negotiations, maybe even a few months of uneasy diplomacy. He had never imagined the battle would end in such a way. The humans hadn't come to negotiate. They hadn't come for power or conquest. They had come to end a threat, and they had done so with terrifying efficiency. What will they want? Zrath repeated the question to himself. The humans had not asked for anything, yet they had acted with no demands, no rhetoric, simply cold, clinical precision. But the Exitherians knew this would not go unnoticed. Humanity had now demonstrated their power, and they were in a position to dictate the future. The officer spoke again, his voice tentative. Do you think they'll leave us alone now, Counselor? Or will they expect something in return for their intervention? Zrath paused, considering the question. The Exitherians were a proud people, but they had seen enough in the last few hours to know that humanity was not to be underestimated. Whatever the humans decided, they would have to approach it with caution. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted overnight, and the Exitherians would need to adapt. Just then, a communication channel opened on the central screen. A human officer's face appeared, his expression unreadable. Counselor Zrath, we have confirmed the complete destruction of the Ravager fleet. The threat to your people is eliminated. Zrath nodded solemnly. We owe you our lives. The Ravagers, they would have destroyed us. You have my deepest gratitude. The human officer's expression didn't change. Gratitude is noted, Counselor. But understand this. Our actions were not charity. This was a matter of survival, your survival, as well as ours. The Ravagers were a threat to the galaxy as a whole, and we acted to protect our interests as well as yours. Zrath's heart sank. There it was, the unspoken truth. The humans had not come out of compassion or kindness. They had acted out of self-interest, a desire to eliminate a dangerous threat. They had chosen to help, yes, but at what cost? The implications were vast. The Exitherians were now in humanity's debt, and such a debt could never be fully repaid. We understand, Zrath said carefully, but you've given us a second chance. We will not forget what you've done. The human officer nodded once, and the screen went dark. Silence returned, but now it was a different kind of silence, a heavy, uncertain one. The immediate threat was gone, but humanity had shown its power. The Exitherians would have to walk a fine line in the coming days. The war was over, but the real battle was just beginning. The days following the battle were filled with uncertainty. Scytherian ships slowly returned to their capital orbit, now secured, their systems still scanning for any lingering Ravager forces, though none remained. Despite the victory, there was an overwhelming sense of dread in the air. The Exetherian government held emergency meetings, trying to piece together a future after their near annihilation, but all eyes kept drifting to one thing: humanity's role. Councillor Zrath had requested a private audience with the human delegation. He knew this was the moment that would define their future, and yet he had no idea what to expect. Humanity had shown themselves to be incredibly powerful, more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. They had saved the Cytherians, yes, but at what cost? And what would they ask in return? There was no way they would offer such help without expecting something, and Zrath knew the price of survival might be too high. The doors to the chamber slid open, and the human delegation entered. The leader, a tall officer in a dark, imposing uniform, walked ahead. His name, according to reports, was Commander Gabriel Horn. He didn't wear the look of a conqueror, nor that of a savior, but rather something between. A calculating pragmatist, one who understood the true cost of power. Zrath stepped forward to meet him, his heart pounding in his chest. "Commander Horn," he began, struggling to maintain his composure. "On behalf of the Exetherian people, I thank you for your intervention. You have spared us from extinction." Horn nodded, his expression cold and unreadable. The Ravagers were a threat to the galaxy as a whole. Your survival was, in part, a strategic necessity. The galaxy cannot afford to have such an enemy grow unchecked. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "But you are right to wonder what the cost will be." Zrath braced himself, the pit in his stomach deepening. "We understand. Whatever you ask, we will give you. But you must understand, Commander, we have lost so much. Our fleets are shattered, our people broken." Horn's eyes flickered, but he said nothing for a moment. Then his voice cut through the silence. "I am not here to ask for tribute or control. We have no interest in ruling you, Counselor." He paused again, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "But you will owe us. Not just your gratitude, but your loyalty. Humanity has shown you mercy, but mercy has its limits." Zrath felt a chill run through him. "Loyalty," he repeated, his voice low. "You saved us, but now you want something more." "Not just loyalty," Horn replied, his gaze sharp. "A partnership, a mutual defense pact, a shared future in which your survival is tied to ours. The galaxy is no longer the same after this battle. We've shown that humanity is not a force to be underestimated, but we need your cooperation to ensure the peace we've created lasts. The Ravagers are gone, but there are other threats out there, and we will need every ally we can get." Zrath looked into Horn's eyes, understanding now that this was the price of humanity's intervention. They had not come to conquer. They had come to redefine the galaxy's power structure. Humanity would no longer sit on the sidelines. They were now a force to be reckoned with, and the Exetherians would either stand with them or fall alone. "We will stand with you," Zrath said, his voice firm, though his mind raced. "Whatever it takes to secure peace." Horn nodded, a faint trace of satisfaction in his expression. "Then we have an agreement. But remember, Counselor, our terms are not negotiable. The price for peace is high, and it begins now." As the human delegation filed out of the room, Zrath felt the weight of the future pressing down on him. He had just agreed to a partnership, but it was not one made out of equality. The Exetherians were now indebted to humanity, perhaps more than they realized. And though the immediate threat was gone, a new, more complex struggle had just begun. The days following the agreement were filled with rapid changes. The Exetherians, who had once held the dominant position in the galaxy, now found themselves part of a new order, a fragile alliance with humanity at its core. Their military was shattered, their infrastructure damaged, and their people left with the haunting memories of near annihilation. In the wake of the Ravager defeat, the Exetherians had little choice but to embrace the deal. Survival, they realized, required more than just arms and resources. It demanded cooperation with the only power that had shown the will and the ability to stop the Ravagers. Councillor Zrath paced the halls of his capital's war room, the weight of the recent decisions pressing heavily upon him. The agreement with humanity had been formalized, a treaty now set in stone. In exchange for humanity's intervention, the Exetherians had pledged their loyalty and assistance in securing peace across the galaxy. The terms were clear. There would be no turning back. Humanity would now take its place as the dominant military power in the region, and the Exetherians would serve as their strategic partners, their role secondary but essential. The Exetherians were expected to contribute to humanity's security network, assist in maintaining order, and provide support wherever it was needed. But it was clear that humanity's expectations were much higher than the Exetherians had anticipated. Every movement was monitored, every decision analyzed under the scrutiny of the Human Alliance. As Zrath entered the central briefing room, the human representatives were already seated, waiting for him. Commander Gabriel Horn, now a permanent fixture in the Exetherian command structure, greeted him with a nod. Councillor Zrath, Horn said coolly, "We've received confirmation that the Exetherian fleet is beginning to rebuild. But as we discussed, we require full transparency and cooperation in the rebuilding process." Zrath nodded stiffly. "We understand. We will cooperate fully. Our people need time to recover, but we will comply with the terms." Horn's eyes narrowed. "Your cooperation isn't just expected. It's required. There's no room for hesitation. Humanity is not simply offering protection. We are constructing a new order, and that order has no room for dissent." Zrath stiffened but held his ground. The humans weren't threatening, not directly, but the message was clear. Humanity had not only intervened to save the Exetherians, they had done so with the intent of reshaping the galaxy to their vision. The Exetherians were now pawns in a much larger game, one where their choices would be guided by humanity's goals. "As you say," Zrath replied quietly, "we will comply." The conversation shifted to more practical matters, the rebuilding of the fleet, the integration of human military technology into Cytherian defense systems, and the coordination of forces to prevent any future threats from emerging. But throughout the meeting, Zrath couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled in his stomach. The Ravagers were gone. But what came next? The Exetherians were now bound to a much larger power, one whose ambitions stretched far beyond the protection of their world. Humanity had shown them a vision of the future, one where they were not the rulers, but allies in a new galactic order. As Zrath left the room, he stood for a moment at the window of his office, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars were no longer distant and untouchable. Now, they felt like a map of paths leading to places controlled by forces far beyond his people's comprehension. Humanity had come to their rescue, but they hadn't come to simply save them. They had come to change everything. And in the years to come, the Exetherians would either learn to thrive in this new order or risk being swept aside.